Hey everybody, just a quick message. I wanted to let you know that the American Rambler podcast is going to be wrapping up soon. It's been a bunch of years now. I think I started back in 2016. I forget which season this is supposed to be, season 8. But it's been more than 200 episodes. It's been a lot of work, and it's just time for me to move on. Nothing bad is happening in my life. I have always enjoyed doing the podcast. I'm proud of it. I've had some great guests and some great discussions, but it's just something that has taken a lot of time. The editing process is really labor intensive, and I've done everything on the show since day one. I have done all the recording, all the editing, all the booking of guests, all the travel for $0, and I have had one Patreon subscriber, Brent Steele, out in Utah, and I've always appreciated Brent. He's been on the show a couple times. He has his own podcast, The Hayseed Scholar, so I've appreciated Brent sending me a little bit every month. And I didn't expect to make a lot. I started this because I was such a fan of Mark Maron and loved his podcast, and said, well, maybe I could do my own podcast. At the time, I was living in Colonial Beach, Virginia, which is this beat-up old resort town on the Potomac, and it was honestly a pretty dull place. So I felt like I had some free time. I was starting the podcast. I was recording a lot of music. We had a great two-car garage there where I would record at night, doing music and stuff. But those days are gone. That situation has changed quite a bit. I'm glad to be back in Richmond, but just things have piled up in my life and just don't have the time to do this anymore. I now have a 9-to-5 job, 5 days a week, your kind of typical office job. So that has cut into my time big time. I had been working from home for a number of years, and obviously with COVID, there was a long stretch there where no one was doing much, so I could keep doing it, but it's just getting virtually impossible to find the time now. So it's really just a time thing. I appreciate my guests. I have enjoyed doing it and learning the technology and trying to improve, given for a while I was doing them face-to-face, and then I had to go to Zoom and online, and it's always been kind of a mix of in-person and online. So the sound quality is not always what I would have liked it to be, and that was really kind of the main sticking point for me. There are tons of podcasts out there, and I want to thank some people who have either listened to this show or have had me on their show. I mentioned Brent Steele and the Hayseed Scholar, which I enjoy listening to a lot. There's also Ben Kitchings and the History Voyager podcast. Ben has had me on there a couple times. Dana Buckler, who has been doing quite well. He just had John Travolta on for the second time to talk about a recent project of his. Dana's down in Florida, but he's been doing really well with his show. So if you like movies and listening to interviews about movies, but also just sometimes Dana just, for a while there, he was just kind of doing it on his own and just talking about movies. He was doing research in the library, really old school. And then he got to talk to John Travolta, who lives in the same Florida town that he lives in, and he really knocked it out of the park, and they've kept in touch. So a pretty cool story for Dana. I always enjoy listening to his shows, so check his out. There's also the Professor Buzzkill show, Joe Coohill, a historian who's now in California and seems very happy out there in Southern California. I have had him on and have been on his show. That is my favorite history show. He talks to a wide variety of guests, and if you don't like long podcasts, they're usually about 30, 45 minutes, but the most recent one was on the film Amadeus and all the myths that movie has propagated over the years. Still a great movie, but I have been trying to read up for years to learn more about Mozart, and I know, the things in that movie that are either not true or are fudging things historically, and I've always had this sort of side project of reading up on Mozart. So check out that recent episode. and just talk briefly about some other podcasts that I have always liked. If you like movies, there's the Brett Goldstein podcast called Films to be Buried With. You might know Brett Goldstein from Ted Lasso. He played Roy Kent, the really grumpy soccer player who later becomes a manager, and he's won Emmys for that. In real life, he's a really sweet guy. But the show is surprisingly deep. I mean, it is about death, and it's kind of like that show, Desert Isle Discs. It's basically like, what kind of movies would you take to a desert isle? But instead, how he sets it up is you've died, and you're in heaven, and all they do is watch movies. And what are your favorite movies, XYZ, in terms of the scariest, the funniest, and so on. So that I've been listening to a lot and really have enjoyed. So check out Films to be Buried With. If you're into true crime, there is Unresolved. That's my favorite true crime podcast, really the only one I listen to. But a guy named Michael Whelan, who seems to be in a different part of the country every time I look him up. But he's been doing Unresolved for a while, 7 or 8 years, I think. I'm not sure. But it's just pretty much him talking about various crimes. Sometimes it's a murder investigation. Other times it's not. But he does a very straightforward job. He does the research and he reads it like a story. Sometimes he plays 911 clips, which can be very disturbing. But he does a great job with that show. It is very creepy and never really know what is going to be on there week to week. So I'm always kind of surprised at the content, but always impressed with how he does it. And he doesn't take any kind of ironic view of these crimes. There's that podcast, My Favorite Murder, which I tried to listen to once, was really annoyed by. He doesn't do anything like that. It's just, these are horrible, serious things that have happened to people, and I think it really kind of gets to him. So it's kind of an emotional experience a lot of time listening to his show, but that's really good. Unresolved. Check that out. A comedy podcast I've been getting into lately is What's Wrong with Orny Adams. Orny Adams is a guy from the Boston area. If you know anything about stand-up comedy, he was in the film Comedian with Jerry Seinfeld about 20 years ago, and really kind of set his career back because the film made him look really bad, and he's been trying to kind of overcome that for the last 20 years. He is a funny guy. He is very intense. He can be annoying, but what stand-up comedian isn't annoying sometimes? But his is a kind of mid-range podcast in terms of he's a known name in stand-up, but he's not a household name. And sometimes he has guests, sometimes he just talks on his own. But I'm kind of on the same wavelength with this guy lately. He talks a lot about kind of how society has gotten so weird since Trump and COVID, and just kind of the little things that add up that drive us a little bit crazy. So he's very observational, but he's a guy that reads, and sometimes he talks about some big issues and whatever, philosophy or medicine. So I've been into that podcast lately, What's Wrong with Orny Adams. He hasn't been doing it a long time, not as long as a lot of comedians, but it seems like his audience is growing. And some days it's not what I'm into, but if I have some time, and he's on a good rant, it could be really fun. So check that out if you like comedy podcasts. Another history podcast I love is Real Dictators. Recently they did Saddam Hussein. The most recent one was on Herod, the king of Judea from the Bible, and that's been interesting hearing the history of him, because I didn't know anything about him other than what little there is in the Bible. But Real Dictators has been on for I don't know, 4 or 5 years maybe. I'm pretty sure it's a pre-COVID show, but obviously they go through a stack of world leaders who are pretty horrendous. They had a long series on Hitler. I don't know how many episodes total, but I guess Hitler's kind of the number one dictator, and they certainly gave him a lot of attention, and those episodes were really good, really going into detail, not just World War II and the rise of the Nazis, but his early life and political career too. So that is a show I always really look forward to. They do take long breaks. Sometimes it won't be on for a month or a couple months, but when they're in a series, I really look forward to it. And that is a really great history show. It's a British narrator, and the production values are really high. It's a Noiser Network show, so they have sound effects. They talk to various historians. So it's a really well-produced show, and about an hour each episode, so they go by pretty quick. And the last podcast that I want to plug and give a shout out to is 100 Horrors. This is a British podcast. They're these three guys, and I'm not sure what you would call it. It's an area of England called Teesside, which I guess is kind of mid. I don't know if it's considered the Midlands, but it's not north, it's not south. I think it's on the eastern side of England, if my geography serves me there. But it's two brothers and then a friend of theirs, and it's straight up the funniest podcast I've ever heard. I mean, these are just three dudes talking about movies, but it can be really funny, and they're usually only 20 to 30 minute shows. Sometimes they have special guests. They had their dad on a couple times. So it's just really kind of a very, very loose, very funny show. But again, pretty high production values for guys that are not professional podcasters. But the audio quality has been good, and their hook is that they're trying to find the 100 best horror movies of all time. It started out as one of them had a poster where it had supposedly the 100 horror movies you need to watch. And so they went through the poster. They had these little pictures of each movie. So some of them are classics, some of them not so much. But they did that for 2 seasons. They did one movie per week. And the 2 seasons, well, the 2 years, I should say, it went so well, they've continued that. And it's one of those podcasts, too, it's cool because it's not such a high level where if you text, if you contact them on Instagram or something, they're not going to blow you off. Like, they actually respond. They will read your comments on the air. So if you like to participate, as I do sometimes, it's a fun show in that respect. And it's also in another country, so it's kind of cool to hear your comments read in a podcast in England. I'm not sure how big their audience is. I mean, I think it's pretty big in terms of DIY podcasts. It's certainly not up there with Joe Rogan and Mark Maron, but I think they've got a pretty good following, and they don't do any ads or anything like that. I don't know if they could make money doing ads. Maybe they're not quite there, but it certainly is a very funny show, and enjoy listening to that every week. So yeah, that's just the handful of podcasts that I am listening to now. Honestly, with podcasting, I think it's kind of become like blogging was. Everyone had a blog and people didn't have time, and it sort of gets consolidated, I guess. I guess there's still people who make money blogging, but most regular people, if they did it, they don't do it anymore. And so I think a lot of podcasts, people are just not going to be doing them forever, obviously. And I'm not saying I would never do another podcast again. It would probably be something a little bit different, but whatever I have been doing has sort of reached the end of the line for me. So the American Rambler podcast, the last episode that I did with Billy Don Burns, that's going to be the last. And I'm going to migrate them over to my personal webpage, which is ColinEWoodward.com. So if you want to listen to an older episode, I will be putting them up there, but it will take a while. The thing with Libsyn is it's a great podcast hosting site, but if you're paying for it and you're not using it, it's just kind of a waste of money, and it's not that much. It's $20 a month, but I figure that in addition to the time crunch, it just doesn't make sense for me to do any more episodes along the lines that I've been doing them. So it is wrapping up, and will probably be within the next couple of weeks. So if you wanted, I don't know what's going to happen with the episodes on Spotify and Amazon and YouTube. I don't know if they delete all the older episodes, but I'm just going to assume that they do. But hopefully Libsyn will just kind of leave them up there, so the old ones will be there up until the end of 2023, and we'll be you can get them on Spotify or whatever. I figured the end of the year was a good time to stop, and I can do some other things starting in 2024. I thank you for those who listened. Thank you for your support. Whatever feedback you might have given over the years, if you were a guest or you were helpful or encouraging to me back on my Twitter days or since then, I really appreciate it. If you were podcasting, wishing you all the best. If you're thinking about doing it, get some good mics. Make sure you know how to edit audio, get something like Audacity, and try to get a hook. Try to come up with an idea for a podcast that maybe no one else is doing. It's a twist on something that other people are doing. I don't know, but usually the ones that are pretty popular, there is that hook, and it's not just kind of people talking about whatever, and you just can't expect to be of a Mark Maron or Joe Rogan level if you've never been on TV. If you're not a celebrity, you're just probably never going to make any money. So think about that going in, but even if you do, temper your expectations. But it can be very fun, and I got to talk to people I would never been able to talk to otherwise, or wouldn't had the excuse to do it. So I've had some very cool guests, and it was a very rewarding experience at times. And like I said, I'm proud of it, but enough is enough. All right. Well, I hope everything's going okay with your Christmas shopping, or if you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope whatever you're doing is going okay. And Happy New Year. It'll be 2024 before you know it, and we have an election year coming up. Isn't that going to be fun? Aren't you looking forward to that? My God. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks again for listening and for all your support over the years. I appreciate it. Bye.